In the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, more than 5,000 years ago, the first known civilization in human history began to take shape. Cities rose from the floodplains. Temples towered above mud brick houses. Farmers worked irrigated fields while scribes pressed wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay tablets. This was Sumer, a region in southern Mesopotamia where some of the earliest cities, governments, writing systems, and monumental temples appeared. The story of Sumer is not just the story of one ancient culture. It is the beginning of recorded civilization as we know it. Welcome, and thank you for joining this long historical journey. Tonight, we will follow the rise of the Sumerians step by step, beginning with the earliest farming communities in Mesopotamia and moving through the growth of powerful city-states like Uruk, Uruk, and Lagash. We will explore how irrigation transformed the landscape, how writing was invented to manage growing economies, and how kings, priests, and merchants shaped one of the most influential societies in ancient history. Along the way, we will look at the daily lives of ordinary people, the construction of massive temple complexes called and the conflicts that eventually led to the decline of Sumerian political power. Few people realize how much of modern civilization traces its roots back to this region. Systems of law, organized government, urban planning, large-scale agriculture, written literature, and complex trade networks all took important early forms in Sumerian cities. Clay tablets discovered by archaeologists show that these early societies kept records of crops, trade goods, and legal agreements thousands of years before similar systems appeared elsewhere. These records allow historians to reconstruct the world of the Sumerians with surprising clarity. But they also raise an important question. How did a civilization like this emerge in a landscape that had once been a sparsely populated river plain? Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Sleep Tide if you enjoy long, calm explorations of ancient history. And leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I'm always curious to see how many different parts of the world are joining these historical journeys together. Also, share your thoughts on this question. Which ancient civilization do you think had the greatest influence on the modern world? Now, let's begin at the very beginning of the story. Long before the great cities of Sumer existed, when small communities first settled the river plains of Mesopotamia and began experimenting with the systems that would eventually support the world's first urban civilization. The rise of Sumerian civilization did not happen suddenly. Long before cities like Uruk or Uruk appeared, the land of southern Mesopotamia was home to small farming communities that gradually learned how to manage one of the most challenging environments in the ancient world. The region lies between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, whose seasonal flooding deposited rich layers of fertile silt across the plains. This natural process made agriculture possible, but it also created serious challenges. Floodwaters could arrive unpredictably, sometimes destroying crops and settlements. At other times, long dry periods made farming difficult without careful management of water resources. Early inhabitants of the region began developing irrigation systems to control these waters. Simple canals and channels allowed farmers to direct river water toward their fields during dry seasons while reducing the damage caused by flooding. These irrigation systems required cooperation among multiple families, since canals often extended across large areas of land. Over time, managing water resources encouraged communities to organize themselves in more structured ways. Leaders emerged to coordinate labor, maintain canals, and resolve disputes over land and water access. By around 5000 BCE, several settlements had grown into modest towns supported by agriculture, fishing, and trade. Archaeologists referred to this early stage as the Ubad period, named after one of the sites where evidence of these communities was first studied. During this time, houses were built from mud brick, pottery became more refined, and temples dedicated to local deities began appearing at the center of settlements. These early temples were not yet the towering ziggurats that later dominated Sumerian cities, but they already served as focal points for community gatherings and religious activities. The presence of temples indicates that spiritual beliefs were closely connected to the organization of society. Priests likely played an important role in managing temple resources, which could include stored grain, livestock, and offerings brought by farmers and craftsmen. In many cases, temples also acted as economic centers, redistributing food and materials during periods of scarcity. This system helped communities survive in an environment where agricultural success depended heavily on controlling water and managing seasonal cycles. Trade also began to expand during this period. Southern Mesopotamia lacked certain natural resources such as stone, timber, and metal ores. As a result, early communities developed exchange networks with neighboring regions where these materials could be obtained. Archaeological evidence shows that goods such as obsidian, copper, and valuable stones traveled long distances through these trade routes. Merchants carried agricultural products, textiles, and crafted goods in return. Over centuries, these developments gradually transformed the river plains of Mesopotamia. Irrigation expanded farmland, population increased, and settlements grew larger. The foundations were being laid for something unprecedented in human history: the rise of true cities, where thousands of people would live together under organized systems of governance, religion, and economic production. The most famous of these early cities would soon appear along the Euphrates River. In the next act, we follow the growth of Uruk, the city that many historians consider the first true urban center in human history. By around 4000 BCE, the landscape of southern Mesopotamia was undergoing a transformation that had never happened before in human history. What had once been scattered farming villages along the floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was slowly developing into something larger and more complex. Among these settlements, one location began to grow faster than the others. This place was Uruk, a city that many historians consider the first true urban center in the world. Uruk was located along a branch of the Euphrates River, in an area where irrigation canals could distribute water across wide stretches of farmland. The surrounding land was extremely fertile when properly managed, and irrigation systems allowed farmers to grow crops such as barley, wheat, and dates in large quantities. As agricultural production increased, the settlement could support a growing population. Families who had once lived in smaller villages began moving toward the expanding urban center, attracted by opportunities for trade, work, and access to religious institutions. Archaeological excavations at Uruk reveal how quickly the settlement expanded. Early layers of the city show modest mud brick houses and small temple structures, similar to those seen in earlier Ubat settlements. But by the Uruk period, which began around 4000 BCE, the scale of construction increased dramatically. Large public buildings appeared, and the city began developing distinct districts. Some areas were dedicated to religious activity, while others became centers for administration, trade, and craft production. One of the most important structures in Uruk was the Temple of Anu, dedicated to a sky god who held a central place in Sumerian belief. This temple complex stood on a raised platform and served as both a religious and administrative center. Priests working within the temple oversaw offerings, ceremonies, and the management of temple-owned lands. Over time, temples like this one became powerful institutions that controlled significant portions of the local economy. Farmers brought portions of their harvest as offerings, craftsmen provided goods, and temple administrators distributed resources when needed. Another major temple complex in Uruk was dedicated to the goddess Inanna, later known in other cultures as Ish. Inanna was associated with love, fertility, and warfare, and her temple became one of the most influential religious centers in the city. The presence of multiple temples dedicated to different deities shows how religion was integrated into nearly every aspect of urban life. Religious festivals, rituals, and offerings brought people together while reinforcing the authority of temple institutions. As the city expanded, Uruk also became a center for specialized labor. Not everyone in the city worked in agriculture. Some people focused on pottery production, metalworking, weaving textiles, or constructing buildings. Archaeological discoveries show large workshops where craftsmen produced goods in significant quantities. This level of specialization was made possible because the city's agricultural system produced enough food to support workers who were not directly involved in farming. The growth of Uruk required new ways of organizing information and managing resources. As temples and administrators began overseeing larger populations and economic activities, they needed systems to track goods, labor, and agricultural production. Clay tokens and simple accounting methods were used at first, but these systems soon evolved into something far more important: the earliest known form of writing. This development would soon transform not only Uruk, but the entire history of human civilization. In the next part, we examine how the invention of writing in Sumer allowed administrators to record transactions, preserve knowledge, and create the first written literature in human history. As the city of Uruk expanded and its population increased, managing the flow of goods and labor became more complicated. Farmers delivered grain to temple storehouses, craftsmen produced pottery and tools, and merchants carried goods along trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with neighboring regions. Keeping track of these transactions required a reliable system for recording information. At first, administrators used simple counting methods, including clay tokens that represented specific quantities of goods such as grain, livestock, or containers of oil. These tokens were sometimes sealed inside clay envelopes to verify the contents of a shipment or agreement. Over time, however, these early accounting methods became too limited for the growing complexity of the city's economy. Temple administrators needed a way to record not only quantities, but also details about ownership, delivery, and distribution. The solution gradually developed into the earliest known system of writing, created in the late 4th millennium BCE during the height of Uruk's expansion. Instead of using tokens alone, scribes began pressing symbols into wet clay tablets using a reed stylus. These symbols represented objects, numbers, and eventually sounds associated with spoken language. This new writing system is known today as cuneiform, a term derived from the Latin word for wedge, referring to the triangular shapes made by the stylus when it was pressed into clay. The earliest cuneiform signs were primarily pictographic, meaning that they resembled the objects they represented. For example, a symbol for grain might resemble a simple drawing of a stalk or seed. Over time, however, these pictographs evolved into more abstract signs that could represent both ideas and sounds, making the system more flexible and capable of expressing complex information. The invention of writing transformed how the Sumerians organized their society. Temple administrators could now keep detailed records of agricultural production, tax contributions, labor assignments, and trade transactions. Thousands of clay tablets discovered at Uruk and other Sumerian cities contain lists of goods, accounts of deliveries, and administrative records that provide insight into the daily operation of early urban economies. These tablets reveal a world where barley, livestock, textiles, and metals moved through organized systems of storage and redistribution, managed by temples and city authorities. Writing also created a new profession within Sumerian society. The scribe. Learning to read and write cuneiform required specialized training, and scribes became highly respected members of the community. Many scribes were educated in temple schools, where they practiced writing symbols repeatedly on clay tablets. Some surviving tablets contain exercises used by students, showing lines of repeated characters as apprentices learned the complex system of signs. Although writing initially served administrative purposes, it soon expanded into other areas of cultural life. Scribes began recording myths, religious hymns, royal inscriptions, and eventually stories that reflected the beliefs and experiences of Sumerian society. One of the most famous examples of early Mesopotamian literature is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a narrative poem about a legendary king of Uruk who seeks immortality and confronts the limits of human life. While the surviving versions of this story were written later, its origins can be traced back to earlier Sumerian traditions. The ability to record information permanently on clay tablets had lasting consequences for human civilization. Written records allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations. Laws could be documented, historical events preserved, and complex economic systems managed with greater accuracy. Writing also enabled communication between distant regions, since messages could be transported and read by officials in other cities. As the use of writing spread throughout Mesopotamia, it became an essential tool for governing increasingly complex urban societies. Cities like Uruk were no longer simply large villages. They were centers of administration, religion, trade, and cultural development. The next stage of this transformation involved the emergence of powerful cities, each with its own rulers, temples, and armies, competing for influence across the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia. In the next part, we follow the political evolution of Sumerian society as cities such as Ur, Lagash, and Kish rose to prominence and began competing for control of the region. As Uruk continued to expand during the late 4th millennium BCE, it became more than just a large settlement. It evolved into one of the earliest known cities, a political system in which a city and its surrounding farmland functioned as an independent political entity. Each city-state in southern Mesopotamia controlled its own irrigation networks, agricultural lands, religious institutions, and local administration. The city itself served as the central hub where economic, political, and religious activities were coordinated. In Uruk, temples remained at the heart of this system. The temple complexes dedicated to gods such as Anu and Inanna controlled large areas of farmland and employed significant numbers of workers. Farmers cultivated temple lands, herders cared for livestock, and craftsmen produced tools and goods used in both religious ceremonies and everyday life. These resources were stored in temple storehouses and redistributed according to administrative decisions made by temple authorities. This arrangement gave religious institutions enormous influence over the economy of the city. However, as the city grew larger and interactions with neighboring settlements became more frequent, another form of leadership began to emerge alongside the temple system. Secular rulers, often referred to in later texts as kings or NCB, gone to take responsibility for matters such as defense, diplomacy, and large construction projects. The presence of strong leadership was particularly important in a region where water management required constant attention and where conflicts between neighboring communities could threaten access to vital resources. Evidence from archaeological remains and early inscriptions suggests that the ruler of Uruk oversaw major building projects designed to demonstrate the city's power and prosperity. Large platforms, temple expansions, and administrative buildings were constructed using vast quantities of mud. These structures required coordinated labor from many workers and reflected the growing organizational capacity of the city-state. Monumental architecture served not only practical purposes, but also symbolic ones, reinforcing the authority of the city's leadership and its connection to the gods. Uruk's influence extended beyond its immediate territory through trade and cultural exchange. The city became a major center for the production of goods such as pottery, textiles, and metal objects. Merchants carried these products along trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with regions as distant as Anatolia, Iran, and the Persian Gulf. In return, Uruk received valuable materials that were scarce in southern Mesopotamia, including timber, stone, and metals needed for tools and ornaments. Archaeologists have found evidence of Uruk-style artifacts and architectural features at sites far from the city itself. These discoveries suggest that Uruk maintained trading colonies or influence over distant settlements during the height of its expansion. This network of exchange helped spread elements of Sumerian culture, including architectural techniques and administrative practices, across large areas of the Near East. At the same time, the rise of powerful city-states also introduced new challenges. Competition for land, water, and trade routes sometimes led to tensions between neighboring cities. As populations grew and resources became more valuable, conflicts began to appear more frequently in historical records, and archaeological evidence, the emergence of organized leadership made it possible for cities to mobilize workers and soldiers to defend their territories or expand their influence. By the end of the Uruk period, southern Mesopotamia was home to several thriving urban centers, each with its own temples, administrators, and rulers. Uruk had demonstrated that large-scale urban life was possible, and its innovations, especially writing and administrative systems, would soon spread across the region. The next stage of the story follows the rise of additional Sumerian cities and the complex political landscape that developed as these city-states interacted through trade, alliances, and warfare. By the end of the 4th millennium BCE, Uruk had reached a level of size and complexity that had never before existed in human history. Archaeologists estimate that the city may have held 40,000 to 50,000 inhabitants, with additional populations living in surrounding villages that depended on the city's economic and religious institutions. Massive temple complexes dominated the skyline. Administrative buildings coordinated the flow of goods, and workshops produced pottery, textiles, and tools in quantities large enough to supply both the city and its trading partners. The influence of Uruk extended well beyond its walls. Throughout Mesopotamia and neighboring regions, archaeologists have discovered pottery styles, administrative tools, and architectural designs that closely resemble those developed in the city. This phenomenon is often referred to as the Uruk expansion during this period. Settlements across northern Mesopotamia and parts of Syria and Anatolia began adopting elements of the urban culture that had emerged in southern Mesopotamia. Some of these settlements appear to have been trading outposts or colonies, connected to the economic network centered around Uruk. The spread of these cultural elements suggests that Uruk was not only a powerful city but also a model for urban organization. Other communities began constructing larger public buildings, organizing administrative systems, and participating more actively in long-distance trade. The innovations developed in Uruk, particularly writing, accounting systems, and centralized administration, proved useful for managing the growing complexity of early urban societies. However, the dominance of Uruk did not last forever. As other cities in southern Mesopotamia continued to grow, power gradually became distributed among several major urban centers. Cities such as Lagash, Kish, and Nippur developed their own political institutions and religious traditions. Each city-state controlled its surrounding agricultural lands and irrigation networks, and each sought to strengthen its influence over trade routes and neighboring territories. This shift created a landscape in which multiple powerful cities coexisted within relatively close proximity. Cooperation and trade remained important parts of regional life, but competition also increased. Access to fertile land and reliable water sources was essential for survival in the Mesopotamian environment, and disputes over canals or farmland could escalate into conflicts between rival cities. Despite these rivalries, the cultural foundations established during the Uruk period continued to shape Sumerian civilization. Writing spread throughout the region, allowing administrators in many cities to record economic transactions and legal agreements. Religious traditions associated with major deities such as Inanna, Enlil, and Anu became widely recognized across Sumerian society. Monumental temple construction remained a central feature of urban life, reinforcing the connection between political authority and religious institutions. Uruk itself remained an important city for centuries, remembered in later literature as the legendary home of King Gilgamesh, one of the most famous figures in ancient Mesopotamian tradition. Stories about Gilgamesh describe him as a powerful ruler who built great walls around the city and undertook epic journeys in search of wisdom and immortality. While the historical details behind these stories remain uncertain, they reflect the enduring cultural significance of Uruk within Sumerian memory. By the early 3rd millennium BCE, the stage was set for the next major phase of Sumerian history. The region now contained numerous city-states, each competing for influence while sharing a common cultural framework shaped by centuries of development. Writing, organized government, long-distance trade, and monumental religious architecture had all become defining features of the civilization. In the next act, we explore how these city-states interacted with one another, forming alliances, competing for power, and shaping the political landscape of ancient Sumer. By the early 3rd millennium BCE, the region of southern Mesopotamia had developed into a landscape dominated by multiple powerful cities. Instead of a single centralized kingdom, Sumer was divided among independent urban centers, such as Lagash, Kish, Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu. Each city controlled its surrounding farmland, irrigation canals, and villages, functioning as a self-governing political unit. Although these cities shared language, religious traditions, and many cultural practices, they often competed with one another for influence and resources. The geography of southern Mesopotamia played an important role in shaping this political structure. The land was largely flat and crossed by networks of rivers and canals that provided the water necessary for agriculture. Because irrigation systems extended across wide areas, maintaining them required constant coordination and labor. Control over canals could determine which communities received enough water to support crops. As a result, disputes over irrigation networks sometimes became sources of tension between neighboring cities. Each Sumerian city had its own patron deity and central temple complex dedicated to that god. In Nippur, the most important temple honored Enlil, the powerful god associated with wind, air, and authority. Nippur held special religious significance for the entire Sumerian world because Enlil was considered one of the highest-ranking gods in the pantheon. Even rulers from other cities often sought recognition from Nippur's priests to legitimize their authority. This connection between political leadership and religious institutions remained a defining feature of Sumerian society. At the center of each city-state stood a ruler who held both administrative and military responsibilities. In early periods, rulers were sometimes known as Insi, a title often translated as governor or city lord. Later, some leaders adopted the title Lug, meaning great man or king, reflecting the growing power of certain rulers. These leaders oversaw the construction of temples, city walls, and irrigation projects, while also organizing the defense of their territories against external threats. Archaeological discoveries and early inscriptions provide glimpses into the daily operation of these cities. Clay tablets record the distribution of food rations to workers, the management of agricultural land, and the allocation of materials used in construction projects. These records reveal a society where economic activities were closely tied to both temple institutions and royal administration. Grain from surrounding fields was stored in large facilities, and workers received portions of this grain as payment for their labor. As the population of Sumerian cities continued to grow, their economies became increasingly interconnected. Trade routes linked cities through the exchange of agricultural goods, textiles, and crafted objects. Merchants transported materials such as copper, stone, and timber from distant regions into the resource-poor plains of southern Mesopotamia. These networks allowed city-states to obtain materials necessary for tools, construction, and luxury items used in religious ceremonies or elite households. However, cooperation among cities did not eliminate competition. Historical records from the early dynastic period describe conflicts between neighboring city-states over control of farmland, water sources, and trade routes. Rival rulers sometimes built defensive walls around their cities, while armies composed of trained soldiers were organized to protect territories or expand influence. Despite these rivalries, the shared cultural framework of Sumer remained strong. The same writing system, cuneiform, was used across multiple cities, allowing communication and record-keeping throughout the region. Religious festivals, myths, and traditions were widely recognized, connecting different communities through common beliefs. This combination of shared culture and political competition defined the early dynastic period of Sumerian history. The region was a mosaic of powerful urban centers, each striving to strengthen its authority while participating in the broader civilization that had developed along the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. In the next part, we examine how rivalry between specific city-states shaped the political landscape of Sumer and led to some of the earliest recorded wars in human history. As the city-states of Sumer grew in size and influence, competition between them became more intense. Control over fertile farmland, irrigation canals, and trade routes was essential for survival in the environment of southern Mesopotamia. Because the landscape depended heavily on carefully managed water systems, even small disruptions could affect crop production across entire regions. When neighboring cities disagreed over canal routes or land boundaries, disputes could escalate into open conflict. Some of the earliest historical records written on clay tablets describe these struggles, providing one of the first documented examples of organized warfare in human history. One of the most well-known conflicts occurred between the cities of Lagash and Umma, two neighboring city-states located in southern Mesopotamia. The disputes centered on a stretch of fertile land known as the Guadina, an agricultural region situated between the territories of the two cities. Both Lagash and Umma claimed the right to cultivate this land and control the canals that irrigated it. Because the Guadina was crucial for food production, neither city was willing to abandon its claim. Our knowledge of this conflict comes primarily from inscriptions created by the rulers of Lagash. These inscriptions describe a series of confrontations between the two cities during the early dynastic period. One of the most famous artifacts associated with this conflict is the Stele of the Vultures, a carved stone monument that commemorates the victory of Lagash over Emma. Stele shows soldiers marching in organized formations, carrying spears and shields while their ruler leads them into battle. Scenes carved into the stone depict defeated enemies and vultures flying overhead, symbolizing the aftermath of the conflict. The imagery on the Stele of the Vultures provides valuable insight into early Sumerian warfare. Soldiers appear equipped with spears, helmets, and large rectangular shields, suggesting that organized military units had already developed within these cities. Armies likely consisted of farmers and laborers who were mobilized during times of conflict. Military leaders coordinated the movement of troops and defended irrigation networks, city walls, and strategic farmland. These conflicts were not constant, but they occurred often enough to shape the political landscape of the region. Alliances sometimes formed between cities to counter the influence of stronger rivals. At other times, diplomatic agreements were negotiated to establish boundaries or regulate the use of shared irrigation systems. Clay tablets and inscriptions from the period show that rulers were aware of the importance of maintaining both military strength and political negotiation. Despite the presence of warfare, economic and cultural exchange continued between many cities. Merchants traveled along established routes, carrying goods such as grain, textiles, and crafted objects. Temples across the region honored similar deities and participated in shared religious traditions. This mixture of rivalry and cooperation created a dynamic political environment in which cities could compete for power while still remaining part of a broader Sumerian cultural world. The frequent conflicts between city-states also encouraged the development of stronger leadership. Rulers who successfully defended their territories or expanded their influence gained prestige and authority. Some leaders began presenting themselves not only as administrators but also as military commanders chosen by the gods to protect their people. This connection between kingship, warfare, and divine approval became an important theme in later Mesopotamian political ideology. Over time, the repeated struggles between city-states created opportunities for particularly powerful rulers to extend their authority beyond a single city. Ambitious leaders sought to unite neighboring territories under their control, setting the stage for the first attempts at regional dominance in Mesopotamian history. In the next part, we examine how certain rulers began expanding their influence across multiple cities, gradually moving Sumer toward the formation of larger political structures that would eventually lead to the rise of early empires. As conflicts between Sumerian city-states continued during the early dynastic period, some rulers began attempting something new, extending their authority beyond the boundaries of a single city. Rather than defending only their own territory, ambitious leaders sought to dominate neighboring cities and control larger portions of southern Mesopotamia. These efforts did not yet produce permanent empires. but they marked an important step toward broader political unification in the region. One of the earliest rulers known for expanding influence beyond his own city was Enatum of Lagash, who ruled during the 25th century BCE. Enatum appears in inscriptions as both a military leader and a devout servant of the gods. The stele of the vultures, mentioned earlier, celebrates his victory over the neighboring city of Umma. According to inscriptions from Lagash, Enatum claimed that the gods had granted him authority not only over his own city but over surrounding territories as well. After defeating Umma, he established new boundaries and imposed conditions intended to prevent future disputes over farmland and irrigation canals. Enatum's campaigns did not stop with this victory. Texts suggest that he conducted military expeditions against several other cities across Sumer. While the exact details remain uncertain, the inscriptions indicate that Lagash briefly achieved a position of considerable regional influence under his leadership. This kind of expansion showed that the political landscape of Sumer was beginning to shift. City-states were no longer isolated powers. They were part of a competitive environment where strong rulers could temporarily dominate multiple territories. Another significant figure from this period was Lugalsagasi, the ruler of the city of Umur, who lived several generations after Enatum. Lugalsagasi managed to accomplish what few earlier leaders had achieved. He united a large portion of southern Mesopotamia under his authority. Inscriptions attributed to him claim that his rule extended from the Persian Gulf in the south, two regions near the Mediterranean Sea in the west. Although these claims may include some exaggeration, they suggest that Lugalsagasi succeeded in conquering or controlling many Sumerian cities, including the influential city of Uruk. For a brief period, Lugalsagasi appears to have been the most powerful ruler in Sumer. His success demonstrates how the constant rivalry between city-states could produce leaders capable of expanding their influence across the entire region. However, his dominance did not last long. The political structure of Sumer remained fragile, and rival powers continued to emerge. During this same period, another development was taking place further north in Mesopotamia. A new political force was rising under the leadership of a man who had become one of the most famous conquerors of the ancient world, Sargon of Akkad. Unlike the rulers of the Sumerian cities, Sargon came from a different cultural background associated with the Akkadian-speaking peoples of northern Mesopotamia. His rise to power would dramatically reshape the political structure of the region. According to later historical records, Sargon challenged and ultimately defeated Lugalsagasi in battle. After capturing him, Sargon reportedly brought the defeated ruler to the city of Nippur, where he displayed him in chains as a symbol of victory. With this conquest, Sargon gained control over the network of Sumerian cities that Lugalsagasi had previously united. This victory marked the beginning of a new political era in Mesopotamian history. The emergence of Sargon's rule signaled a transition from independent city-states toward something larger, a territorial empire that extended across multiple regions and cultures. The Sumerian world, that had been shaped by centuries of rivalry between cities, was about to be integrated into a broader political system under Akkadian leadership. In the next part, we examine how the rise of the Akkadian Empire transformed the political landscape of Mesopotamia and how Sumerian culture continued to influence the region even as new rulers came to power. By the late 3rd millennium BCE, the political landscape of Mesopotamia was changing rapidly. For centuries, the cities of Sumer had functioned as independent cities, each ruled by its own leader and connected through trade, shared religious traditions, and occasional warfare. However, the rise of Sargon of Akkad marked the beginning of a new phase in Mesopotamian history. Instead of a region divided among competing cities, the land between the rivers was about to experience the formation of one of the first true empires. Sargon's rise to power began in the northern city of Akkad, whose exact location remains uncertain but was likely situated somewhere along the Middle Euphrates region. Unlike the Sumerian-speaking populations of the south, Sargon belonged to a group of people who spoke the Akkadian language, a Semitic language related to later languages of the Near East. Despite these cultural differences, The Akkadian rulers adopted many aspects of Sumerian civilization, including its writing system, religious traditions, and administrative practices. After defeating Lugal-Sagasi, the ruler who had previously united many Sumerian cities, Sargon extended his authority across southern Mesopotamia. Inscriptions attributed to Sargon describe campaigns in which he subdued multiple cities and established control over key trade routes and agricultural regions. According to these records, he ruled over a vast territory stretching from the Persian Gulf in the south to parts of northern Mesopotamia and beyond. The creation of the Akkadian Empire transformed the political organization of the region. Instead of independent city-states competing for influence, many cities were now governed by officials appointed by the imperial administration. These governors were responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining irrigation systems, and ensuring loyalty to the central authority. This system allowed Sargon and his successors to manage a much larger territory than any single Sumerian city had previously controlled. Despite this shift in political power, Sumerian culture remained highly influential throughout the empire. The Akkadian rulers continued using cuneiform writing, which had originally been developed in Sumerian cities centuries earlier. Religious traditions also continued to honor many of the same deities worshipped in Sumer, including gods such as Enlil, Ine, and Anu. Temples remained important centers of both religious activity and economic organization, even under imperial rule. However, the empire itself faced challenges. Governing a large and diverse territory required constant effort to maintain stability. Rebellions occasionally broke out in different regions, and external threats from neighboring peoples placed additional pressure on imperial authorities. Over time, maintaining control over such a wide area became increasingly difficult. After several generations of Akkadian rule, the empire began to weaken. Environmental changes, internal revolts, and invasions by groups such as the Gushans, who came from the mountainous regions to the east, contributed to the gradual collapse of centralized authority. As the Akkadian Empire declined, many cities in southern Mesopotamia regained a degree of independence. Although Sumerian political power had been overshadowed by the rise of the Akkadian Empire, the cultural legacy of Sumer remained deeply embedded in the civilization of Mesopotamia. The writing system, religious traditions, and administrative structures developed in the early Sumerian cities continued to shape the societies that followed. The next stage of the story reveals how Sumer experienced a cultural revival after the fall of Akkadian rule, leading to a final period of renewed prosperity before the civilization gradually faded from political prominence. After the Akkadian Empire weakened and eventually collapsed around the late 22nd century BCE, the political order of Mesopotamia entered a period of instability. The centralized authority that had once controlled much of the region disappeared, and various local groups began competing to fill the power vacuum. Among the forces that emerged during this period were the Gushans, a people who came from the mountainous regions to the east of Mesopotamia. Historical inscriptions written by later Mesopotamian rulers describe the Gushan period as a time of disruption and decline, although modern historians believe these accounts may exaggerate the severity of the situation. Even during this period of political uncertainty, the cities of southern Mesopotamia did not disappear. Agricultural production continued, irrigation systems remained in use, and temple institutions preserved many of the cultural traditions that had developed over centuries. Writing in cuneiform continued to be used for administrative records, religious texts, and economic transactions. These elements helped maintain continuity in Sumerian society despite the loss of centralized imperial authority. Gradually, local rulers began re-establishing stronger control over their territories. One of the most important figures in this process was Utu, a ruler from the city of Uruk. According to surviving inscriptions, Utuhengol led a successful campaign against the Guton rulers who had dominated parts of Mesopotamia. His victory is often presented as a turning point that restored political independence to the Sumerian cities of the south. Although Utuhengol's rule appears to have been relatively short, his achievements helped create conditions for the rise of a new and powerful dynasty. Following this period of recovery, power shifted to the city of Ur, which would soon become the center of a renewed Sumerian state. Around 2112 BC, a ruler named Ur-Nammu established what historians call the Third Dynasty of Ur, often abbreviated as Ur-3. Under Ur-Nammu's leadership, southern Mesopotamia experienced a revival of political stability and economic organization. This period is sometimes described as a Sumerian Renaissance, because it restored many of the traditions and institutions that had flourished before the Akkadian Empire. Ur-Nammu began strengthening the infrastructure of his kingdom by repairing canals, rebuilding temples, and organizing administrative systems that allowed the government to manage agricultural production more effectively. Irrigation networks were essential for sustaining the fertile fields of southern Mesopotamia, and maintaining them required large coordinated labor efforts. By investing in these systems, the new dynasty ensured that agricultural productivity remained strong, supporting both urban populations and state institutions. Another important development during Ur-Nammu's reign was the creation of one of the earliest known written law codes, although the more famous Code of Hammurabi would appear several centuries later. Telaus of Ur-Nammu represent one of the first attempts to formalize legal principles. In written form, these laws addressed issues such as property disputes, theft, marriage arrangements, and compensation for injuries. Recording legal rules on clay tablets allowed authorities to apply consistent standards when resolving conflicts within the kingdom. The revival of political authority under the Third Dynasty of Ur marked the beginning of a new chapter in Mesopotamian history. Cities once again became centers of organized administration, religious life, and economic activity. Temples were rebuilt and expanded, trade networks revived, and scribes continued producing written records that documented the operations of the state. In the next part, we examine how the rulers of the Ur-3 dynasty transformed their capital into one of the most impressive cities of the ancient world, and how monumental architecture once again became a symbol of political power. When Ur-Nammu established the Third Dynasty of Ur around 2112 BC, the city of Ur quickly became the political and cultural center of southern Mesopotamia. Located near the mouth of the Euphrates River, close to the Persian Gulf, Ur had long been an important settlement connected to trade routes linking Mesopotamia with distant regions. Under the new dynasty, however, the city grew into one of the most impressive urban centers of the ancient world. One of the most visible symbols of this renewed power was the construction of monumental architecture. Ur-Nammu ordered the building of a massive ziggurat, a step temple structure that rose high above the surrounding city. The ziggurat of Ur was dedicated to Nana, the Sumerian moon god, who was considered the patron deity of the city. Built from millions of mud bricks and reinforced with baked bricks on its outer surfaces, the structure formed a towering platform with wide stairways leading upward toward a temple at the summit. The ziggurat served both religious and political purposes. As a religious monument, it symbolized the connection between the human world and the divine realm. Priests performed rituals within the temple to honor Nana and seek the god's favor for the city. At the same time, the scale of the structure demonstrated the authority of the ruling dynasty. Constructing such a monument required enormous labor and resources, showing that the rulers of Ur had the ability to mobilize workers and materials across their kingdom. The city itself expanded during this period as administrative buildings, residential districts, and temple complexes were constructed around the central religious institutions. Archaeological evidence suggests that Ur was carefully organized, with streets, courtyards, and neighborhoods arranged to support both daily life and economic activity. Houses were typically built from mud brick and often included several rooms surrounding an open courtyard. These homes provided shelter from the heat while allowing families to carry out domestic activities such as cooking, weaving, and food preparation. The government of the Ur-3 dynasty relied heavily on an organized administrative system supported by trained scribes. Thousands of clay tablets from this period have been discovered by archaeologists, providing detailed records of economic transactions, labor assignments, and agricultural production. These tablets show how officials monitored the distribution of grain, livestock, and other resources throughout the kingdom. Workers involved in state projects received rations of food and clothing, while administrators tracked the movement of goods between cities and storage facilities. Trade also flourished during this time. Because southern Mesopotamia lacked many natural resources, merchants traveled long distances to obtain materials such as timber, metals, and precious stones. Trade routes extended toward Anatolia, the Iranian plateau, and regions along the Persian Gulf. Ships traveling along the rivers and coastal routes carried goods between cities, helping connect the economy of Ur with distant lands. Under the leadership of Ur-Nammu and his successors, the kingdom achieved a level of stability and prosperity that had not been seen in the region for generations. Agricultural production remained strong, administrative institutions functioned efficiently, and monumental architecture reinforced the cultural identity of the Sumerian world. However, maintaining control over such a large territory required constant effort. The rulers of Ur had to manage relationships with neighboring regions, oversee irrigation systems that supported agriculture, and defend their borders against external threats. While the kingdom experienced decades of prosperity, the challenges of governing a complex state would eventually test its stability. In the next part, we explore how the administrative system of the Ur III dynasty operated and how it attempted to manage one of the most organized economies of the ancient world. The prosperity of the Third Dynasty of Ur did not depend only on monumental architecture or strong rulers. Behind the visible achievements of the kingdom stood one of the most organized administrative systems of the ancient world. Thousands of clay tablets discovered at archaeological sites across southern Mesopotamia show how the government carefully recorded economic activities and managed resources across its territory. These documents provide historians with an unusually detailed picture of how the state functioned during this period. The administrative system relied heavily on trained scribes, who used the cuneiform writing system to document nearly every aspect of economic life. Clay tablets recorded deliveries of grain, livestock counts, labor assignments, construction materials, and tax contributions from different regions. Because the kingdom controlled large agricultural lands and irrigation networks, monitoring food production was essential for maintaining stability. Officials responsible for collecting grain ensured that surplus crops were stored in large facilities where they could be redistributed when needed. One of the defining features of the Ur III economy was the use of a ration-based system for many workers. Instead of receiving wages in coins or precious metals, laborers were often paid with measured quantities of food, clothing, or other goods. For example, workers might receive regular rations of barley oil or wool, depending on their roles and the size of their households. Tablets from administrative archives list these rations in precise quantities, showing how the state tracked the distribution of resources to large numbers of people. The government also organized large labor projects involving groups of workers assigned to specific tasks. Some laborers worked on maintaining irrigation canals, which were essential for directing water from the rivers to farmland. Others participated in construction projects such as temple renovations, city walls, or storage facilities. Agricultural workers cultivated state-owned lands that produced grain for redistribution throughout the kingdom. By coordinating these activities through written records, the administration was able to manage resources on a scale that earlier city-states had struggled to achieve. The kingdom itself was divided into provinces, each governed by an official responsible for overseeing local administration. These provincial governors collected taxes, supervised agricultural production, and maintained order within their territories. Reports from these provinces were sent to the central government in Europe, where scribes compiled records and ensured that resources flowed efficiently across the kingdom. This hierarchical system allowed the rulers of Ur to maintain authority over distant regions, while still relying on local officials to handle day-to-day administration. Religion remained closely connected to the administrative structure of the state. Temples dedicated to major deities continued to play important economic roles alongside royal institutions. Offerings of food, animals, and valuable goods were recorded and distributed through temple administrations. Religious festivals brought communities together while reinforcing the legitimacy of the ruling dynasty. which presented itself as chosen or favored by the gods. The efficiency of the Ur-3 administrative system helped sustain the kingdom for several decades. Agricultural productivity remained strong. Trade networks continued operating, and the state maintained the infrastructure necessary for irrigation and transportation. However, managing such a large and centralized system also required constant coordination. If any part of the system weakened, whether through environmental problems, political conflict, or external threats, the effects could quickly spread throughout the kingdom. As the dynasty entered its later generations, signs of strain began to appear. Maintaining control over distant provinces became more difficult, and pressures from neighboring regions started to increase. The same administrative system that had supported the kingdom's prosperity would soon face challenges that tested its ability to keep the state intact. In the next part, we examine the final years of the Third Dynasty of Ur and the events that eventually led to the decline of Sumerian political power. Although the Third Dynasty of Ur brought several decades of stability and prosperity to southern Mesopotamia, its centralized system eventually began to weaken. Like many early states, the kingdom depended heavily on the careful management of agriculture, irrigation, trade routes, and regional administration. When pressures began to affect several of these systems at once, the stability that had supported the Sumerian revival gradually started to erode. One of the major challenges came from the difficulty of maintaining control over distant territories. The Ur-3 kingdom extended across a wide region that included both Sumerian-speaking areas in the south and other populations in surrounding regions. Provincial governors were responsible for managing these territories, but communication and transportation across the kingdom required time and coordination. As years passed, maintaining strong oversight over distant provinces became increasingly difficult. Local leaders sometimes acted more independently, weakening the central authority of the dynasty. External threats also contributed to the decline of the kingdom. Groups living along the frontiers of Mesopotamia began placing pressure on the borders of the state. Among these were the Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people who migrated from regions to the west of Mesopotamia. Over time, Amorite groups moved into the river valleys and established themselves in various cities. Although their arrival did not immediately destroy the existing political system, their presence gradually altered the balance of power in the region. Another factor was the growing difficulty of defending long borders. The rulers of Ur attempted to strengthen their defenses by constructing fortifications and organizing military forces to protect strategic areas. Some historical records describe the building of defensive walls intended to block the movement of hostile groups entering Mesopotamia from the west. However, maintaining such large defensive systems required resources and manpower that placed additional strain on the state's administration. Environmental pressures may also have played a role in weakening the kingdom. Some studies suggest that shifts in climate or changes in river patterns could have affected agricultural productivity in certain areas of Mesopotamia during this period. Because the economy of the kingdom depended heavily on stable crop production, any disruption to irrigation systems or water supplies could have serious consequences for food, distribution, and political stability. The final collapse of the dynasty occurred around 2004 BC, during the reign of Ibbi-Sin, the last ruler of the Third Dynasty of Ur. Historical texts indicate that several provinces had already begun acting independently by this time. The central government struggled to maintain control, and military pressures increased from multiple directions. Eventually, the city of Ur itself was attacked and captured by forces from the eastern region of Elam, a powerful neighboring kingdom located in what is now southwestern Iran. The fall of Ur marked the end of the last major Sumerian dynasty. After the city was conquered, the political structure that had supported the Sumerian revival collapsed. However, the cultural traditions of Sumer did not disappear. Writing, religious beliefs, legal traditions, and administrative practices developed by the Sumerians continued to influence the societies that followed. In the centuries after the fall of Ur, new powers would rise across Mesopotamia, Cities ruled by Amorite dynasties, including the famous city of Babylon, would inherit many elements of Sumerian civilization while shaping new political systems of their own. Although the Sumerians would no longer dominate the region politically, their cultural legacy would remain deeply embedded in the civilizations that followed. This transition marks the beginning of the final stage of our journey. Understanding how Sumerian ideas, technologies, and traditions continued to influence Mesopotamian societies long after the fall of their political power. Although the fall of the third dynasty of Ur ended the last major period of Sumerian political dominance, the civilization itself did not vanish. In many ways, the influence of the Sumerians continued to shape Mesopotamian society for centuries afterward. Even as new rulers emerged and different languages became more common in government and daily life, the institutions, traditions, and technologies first developed in Sumerian cities remained deeply embedded in the culture of the region. One of the most important elements of this legacy was writing. The cuneiform script created in Sumer during the Uruk period continued to be used long after Sumerian ceased to be a spoken language. Later, societies including the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians adapted the writing system for their own languages, while preserving many of its original signs. Clay tablets from these later civilizations show that scribes were still learning the Sumerian language as part of their education, even though everyday speech had changed. In this way, Sumerian became something similar to a classical language used for scholarship and religious literature. The survival of cuneiform writing allowed an enormous body of literature to be preserved. Many myths, hymns, and stories originally composed in Sumerian were copied and studied by scribes centuries after the fall of the Sumerian city. These texts include creation stories, temple hymns, and epic narratives that influenced later Mesopotamian traditions. Through these written works, ideas that originated in Sumer continued to shape the cultural imagination of the region. Religion also remained strongly influenced by Sumerian traditions. The pantheon of gods worshipped in Sumerian cities formed the foundation for the religious systems of later Mesopotamian civilizations. Deities such as Enlil, Inanna, Nana, and Utu continue to appear in religious texts and temple worship. Even after political power shifted to new dynasties, although the names and roles of certain gods evolved over time, many of the core myths and rituals remained rooted in earlier Sumerian beliefs. Another lasting contribution of the Sumerians was their approach to law and administration. The legal code established by Ur-Nammu during the Ur-3 dynasty represents one of the earliest attempts to organize legal principles into a written system. Later, law codes, including the famous Code of Hammurabi in Babylon, followed a similar tradition of recording rules and penalties for various offenses. These legal texts reveal how Mesopotamian societies attempted to regulate economic activities, family relationships, and property rights through formal systems of justice. Urban planning and architecture also reflected the enduring influence of Sumerian ideas. Cities built by later civilizations continued to feature large temple complexes, administrative buildings, and organized residential districts. The ziggurat, a monumental step temple structure first developed in Sumerian cities, remained a prominent architectural feature in many Mesopotamian urban centers. These structures served not only as religious sites, but also as symbols of the connection between political authority and divine approval. Economic systems inherited from the Sumerians also continued to operate in later societies. Agricultural management through irrigation canals remained essential for sustaining populations in southern Mesopotamia. Administrative records tracking the distribution of grain, labor, and goods continued to be recorded on clay tablets using the same accounting methods developed centuries earlier. The endurance of these traditions demonstrates that the Sumerians had established many of the fundamental institutions that would shape Mesopotamian civilization, even though the political landscape changed and new rulers came to power. The cultural framework created by the earliest cities continued to influence how later societies organized their economies, governments, and religious practices. In the next part of this act, We explore how Sumerian knowledge and innovations spread beyond Mesopotamia and influenced neighboring regions throughout the ancient Near East. As Sumerian political power declined after the fall of the Third Dynasty of Uruk, the cultural and technological innovations developed in the region continued to spread across the ancient Near East. This process did not happen through a single event or migration, but through centuries of trade, diplomacy, conquest, and cultural exchange between neighboring societies. Cities that rose to prominence after the Sumerian such as Babylon, Shur, and later Nineveh adopted many of the systems originally developed in the cities of southern Mesopotamia. One of the most important channels for this cultural transmission was education. Scribal schools trained generations of administrators and scholars who learned to read and write using cuneiform tablets. These schools preserved Sumerian vocabulary, grammar, and literature even after the spoken language had largely disappeared from everyday use. Students copied ancient Sumerian texts as part of their training, ensuring that myths, hymns, legal formulas, and administrative traditions continued to circulate across different regions. Because of this educational tradition, Sumerian literary works became foundational texts for later Mesopotamian cultures. Stories originally written in Sumerian were translated into Akkadian and adapted by later civilizations. One of the most famous examples is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which evolved over centuries from earlier Sumerian poems about the legendary king of Uruk. These narratives preserved themes about kingship, mortality, friendship, and the search for wisdom. Themes that remained influential throughout Mesopotamian cultural history. Trade networks also played a crucial role in spreading Sumerian influence. Merchants from Mesopotamian cities traveled along river routes and overland paths, connecting the region to Anatolia, the Levant, and the Iranian plateau. Through these exchanges, not only goods, but also ideas and technologies moved between societies. Techniques related to agriculture, irrigation management, and craft production gradually spread into neighboring regions, helping other communities develop more complex economic systems. Another important aspect of Sumerian influence involved administrative organization. The system of keeping detailed economic records using clay tablets proved extremely useful for managing resources in early states. Later, kingdoms adopted similar practices for recording taxes, trade transactions, and labor obligations. These administrative tools allowed governments to maintain control over larger territories and populations than had previously been possible. Architectural traditions also traveled across the Near East. Monumental temples and step structures, inspired by Sumerian ziggurats, appeared in other Mesopotamian cities. Although each region adapted the style to its own cultural preferences, the basic concept of constructing elevated temple platforms remained an important feature of religious architecture for centuries. In addition to technology and administration, Sumerian religious concepts spread widely. Many of the deities originally worshipped in Sumerian cities became central figures in the pantheons of later Mesopotamian cultures. The goddess Inanna, for example, was known as Ishtar in Akkadian-speaking societies and continued to be associated with fertility, love, and warfare. Similarly, gods such as Enlil, Shamash, and Sin remained important in religious traditions across the region. The spread of these cultural elements illustrates how influential the Sumerians were in shaping the broader civilization of the ancient Near East. Although political leadership shifted to new dynasties and kingdoms, the intellectual and cultural framework created by the earliest Sumerian cities continued to guide how later societies organized their governments, religious practices, and economic systems. In the next part, we examine how modern archaeology rediscovered the civilization of Sumer, and how scholars gradually pieced together its history from thousands of clay tablets buried beneath the Mesopotamian plains. For thousands of years after the fall of the Sumerian cities, the memory of this early civilization faded from human awareness. Ancient Mesopotamian cities gradually declined, many of them abandoned as river courses shifted and political power moved to new centers. Wind and sand slowly covered the ruins of temples, palaces, and houses, leaving only low mounds rising above the plains of modern-day Iraq. These mounds, known as tells, contain the buried remains of settlements built and rebuilt over centuries. To local populations, they were simply part of the landscape, their deeper history unknown. The rediscovery of Sumer began in the 19th century, when European and Middle Eastern scholars started investigating these ancient mounds in search of the civilizations described in classical and biblical texts. Early excavations focused on large sites such as Nineveh and Babylon, where explorers uncovered impressive palace ruins and stone inscriptions belonging to later Mesopotamian empires. These discoveries sparked growing interest in the ancient history of the region. But the earliest chapters of Mesopotamian civilization were still unknown. A major breakthrough came when archaeologists began excavating southern Mesopotamian sites such as Uruk and Lagash. Beneath layers belonging to later civilizations, they discovered much older structures made from mud brick and surrounded by enormous quantities of clay tablets. These tablets were covered in wedge-shaped markings that scholars recognized as cuneiform writing. At first, however, no one fully understood what language the earliest texts represented. The decipherment of cuneiform writing was one of the great scholarly achievements of the 19th century. By comparing inscriptions written in several languages, including Old Persian and Akkadian, researchers gradually learned how to interpret the signs. Once the system was understood, scholars began translating thousands of clay tablets from different archaeological sites. These translations revealed something unexpected. Many of the earliest texts were written in a language that was neither Akkadian nor any other known Semitic language. This mysterious language was eventually identified as Sumerian, belonging to a linguistic family unrelated to the languages spoken in the surrounding regions. The discovery of Sumerian texts revealed the existence of a previously unknown civilization that had flourished thousands of years earlier. Administrative records, religious hymns, legal documents, and literary works began to emerge from the translated tablets, offering a detailed glimpse into the society that had once dominated southern Mesopotamia. Excavations in the early 20th century expanded this understanding even further. One of the most famous archaeological projects took place at the ancient city of Uruk, where British archaeologist Leonard Woolley conducted extensive excavations during the 1920s and 1930s. Woolley's team uncovered royal tombs filled with gold ornaments, musical instruments, and elaborate burial goods. These discoveries revealed the wealth and sophistication of Sumerian elites, while also providing insight into burial rituals and social hierarchy within the civilization. At other sites, such as Uruk, archaeologists uncovered temple complexes, administrative buildings, and layers of early urban development stretching back thousands of years. These excavations confirmed that Sumerian cities had been among the first true urban centers in human history. The large number of clay tablets recovered from these sites allowed historians to reconstruct political events, economic systems, and religious traditions with remarkable detail. Today, thousands of Sumerian tablets are preserved in museums and research institutions around the world. Scholars continue studying these texts using modern technologies that allow them to analyze damaged tablets, reconstruct missing passages, and better understand the language and culture of ancient Mesopotamia. Each new discovery adds another piece to the story of how one of the earliest civilizations in human history developed and influenced the world that followed. In the next and final part of this act, we reflect on why the story of Sumer remains important today and what it reveals about the origins of organized human society. When historians and archaeologists look back at the long story of human civilization, the cities of Sumer stand at the very beginning of that record, thousands of years before the rise of Greece, Rome, or other well-known civilizations. The Sumerians had already developed many of the institutions that later societies would rely on. Their achievements did not appear suddenly or in isolation. Instead, they were the result of centuries of experimentation by early farming communities, learning how to manage rivers, organize labor, and cooperate within growing settlements. One of the most important contributions of Sumer was the invention of writing. The cuneiform script, developed in cities such as Uruk, allowed people to record information in a durable form for the first time in human history. With writing, societies could track economic transactions, preserve religious traditions, and record historical events. The ability to store knowledge outside the human memory changed how civilizations functioned. Laws, administrative procedures, and cultural stories could now be transmitted across generations with greater accuracy. Urban organization was another major innovation. The Sumerians demonstrated that large populations could live together within carefully structured cities, supported by irrigation, agriculture, and coordinated labor systems. Their cities included temples, administrative centers, workshops, and residential districts arranged to support both economic production and community life. These early experiments in urban planning provided models that later civilizations would adapt and expand. Sumerian legal traditions also influenced later societies. The early law code created by Ur-Nammu established principles for resolving disputes and regulating social behavior through written rules. Later, Mesopotamian rulers developed similar legal systems, the most famous being the Code of Hammurabi, which preserved many of the same ideas about justice, responsibility, and compensation for wrongdoing. These legal traditions illustrate how early societies sought to create order within growing populations. Religion played a central role in shaping Sumerian culture and political life. Temples dedicated to gods, such as Enlil, Inanna, and Nana, stood at the heart of every major city. Religious ceremonies, offerings, and festivals connected communities to their beliefs about the divine forces governing the world. The architectural form of the ziggurat, a stepped temple platform rising above the city, symbolized the link between heaven and earth. Later, Mesopotamian societies continued building similar structures, demonstrating the lasting influence of Sumerian religious architecture. Beyond specific institutions, the Sumerians also left a legacy of intellectual curiosity and storytelling. The myths and epic narratives preserved on clay tablets reveal how these early people understood their place in the universe. Stories about gods, heroes, and the creation of the world were not merely entertainment. They served as frameworks for explaining natural events, social responsibilities, and moral questions. These narratives influenced later traditions throughout Mesopotamia and continue to be studied today as some of the oldest surviving works of literature. The rediscovery of Sumer in modern times reminds us that much of human history remains hidden beneath the surface of the earth. Archaeologists continued to excavate ancient sites across Mesopotamia, uncovering new tablets, buildings, and artifacts that deepen our understanding of the past. Each discovery contributes to a clearer picture of how the earliest cities developed and how their innovations spread to other parts of the world. The story of Sumer is ultimately a story about the beginning of organized civilization. It shows how communities living along the rivers of southern Mesopotamia gradually created systems of agriculture, writing, government, and religion that allowed large societies to function. Although the political power of the Sumerians eventually faded, the cultural foundations they established continued to shape the development of later civilizations. After the fall of the Third Dynasty of around 2004 BC, the political identity of the Sumerians slowly faded, but their civilization did not disappear. Instead, Sumer became something different, a cultural foundation preserved and transmitted by the societies that followed. New dynasties, often speaking Akkadian or Amorite dialects, took control of cities across Mesopotamia. Yet these rulers inherited a world already shaped by Sumerian institutions, traditions, and intellectual frameworks. Rather than replacing the earlier culture, they adopted and adapted it. One of the clearest examples of this continuity was the continued use of the Sumerian language in scholarship and religion. Although everyday speech in many parts of Mesopotamia shifted toward Akkadian languages, Sumerian remained important in scribal education. Students in scribal schools copied Sumerian texts as part of their training, learning vocabulary, grammar, and traditional literature. Clay tablets from these schools show long lists of Sumerian words and phrases repeated by students practicing the complex writing system. In this way, the language survived as a scholarly and ceremonial medium long after it had ceased to be widely spoken. These scribal traditions helped preserve a vast collection of Sumerian literature. Hymns dedicated to temples and gods were copied repeatedly by generations of scribes. Royal inscriptions describing the deeds of early kings were studied as historical examples of leadership and authority. Myths and epics were recorded, translated, and expanded upon over centuries. The scribes who maintained these texts played a role similar to historians and librarians in later civilizations, ensuring that cultural knowledge would not be lost. The continued use of Sumerian literature also influenced the religious life of Mesopotamia. Many of the hymns and prayers written in Sumerian remained part of temple rituals for generations. Priests recited these texts during ceremonies, honoring the gods, preserving traditions that stretched back to the earliest cities. Even as new deities gained prominence and religious practices evolved, the earlier Sumerian framework remained embedded within temple culture. Political leaders who ruled Mesopotamia after the fall of Sumer also recognized the prestige associated with the ancient civilization. Kings of later dynasties often claimed connections to earlier Sumerian rulers who represented themselves as restorers of ancient traditions. Building or repairing temples, originally constructed during the Sumerian period, became a way for rulers to demonstrate respect for the past while reinforcing their own authority. This reverence for earlier traditions can be seen in royal inscriptions from later Mesopotamian kingdoms. Rulers frequently described themselves as chosen by the same gods worshipped by the Sumerians. They also emphasized their role in maintaining irrigation systems, rebuilding temples, and protecting the cities that had been established centuries earlier. In doing so, they linked their own legitimacy to the long historical legacy of the region. The survival of Sumerian cultural memory illustrates an important aspect of early civilization. Political power may change, but cultural traditions can endure far longer. Even after the Sumerian city-states lost independence, their innovations continued shaping the societies that followed. Writing systems, religious traditions, architectural styles, and administrative practices all remained rooted in the foundations laid by the earliest cities of Mesopotamia. Understanding this cultural continuity helps explain why Sumer is still studied today. The civilization was not merely an early experiment in urban life. It was a starting point from which many later traditions emerged. In the next part, we examine how the intellectual achievements of the Sumerians influenced later developments in mathematics, astronomy, and early scientific thinking. In addition to developing writing, law, and urban organization, the Sumerians also made important contributions to the early development of mathematics and systems for measuring the world around them. These practical tools were not created as abstract scientific theories. Instead, they emerged from everyday administrative and economic needs. Managing farmland, calculating grain storage, organizing labor, and planning construction projects all required methods for counting, measuring, and recording quantities accurately. One of the most significant innovations developed in Sumerian society was the sexagesimal numerical system, which used the number 60 as its base. Unlike the modern decimal system based on 10, the Sumerian system allowed numbers to be divided easily into fractions such as halves, thirds, and quarters. This mathematical structure proved extremely useful for practical calculations related to land measurement, trade quantities, and timekeeping. The legacy of this system is still present in modern life. The division of an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds originates from Mesopotamian mathematical traditions that can be traced back to Sumerian and later Babylonian scholars. Similarly, the circle being divided into 360 degrees reflects calculations based on the same numerical framework. Although these conventions have been preserved through later civilizations, their roots lie in the mathematical practices developed in ancient Mesopotamia. Mathematics also played an important role in managing agriculture. Farmers working along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers needed accurate ways to measure fields and calculate crop yields. Clay tablets discovered by archaeologists contain tables used for solving practical problems related to land division, grain storage, and construction planning. These tablets revealed that scribes were trained to perform complex calculations using standardized procedures. The Sumerians also developed systems for tracking time and observing natural cycles. Agricultural societies depended heavily on seasonal changes, since planting and harvesting had to occur at specific times of the year. Observing the movements of the sun, moon, and stars helped communities predict seasonal patterns and maintain calendars that guided agricultural work and religious festivals. Temple priests and scholars often played a role in observing the sky and recording astronomical events. Although systematic astronomy would develop more fully in later Mesopotamian civilizations, the foundations of these observations can be traced back to earlier Sumerian traditions. Recording celestial patterns helps societies maintain calendars, determine ritual dates, and organize agricultural schedules. Measurement systems also expanded beyond mathematics and timekeeping. Standardized units were used to measure weight, volume, and length in economic transactions. Merchants transporting goods between cities relied on these systems to ensure that exchanges remained consistent and fair. Clay tablets show that administrators carefully tracked quantities of barley, oil, wool, and other commodities using established measurement standards. These developments demonstrate that the intellectual achievements of the Sumerians were closely tied to practical needs. Their systems for counting, measuring, and recording information were designed to support the functioning of complex urban societies. Yet these tools also laid the groundwork for later advances in mathematics, astronomy, and scientific thinking. Over time, scholars in later Mesopotamian civilizations expanded upon these foundations, refining calculations and making more systematic observations of the natural world. However, the basic frameworks, they used numerical systems, measurement units, and written records were inherited directly from the earlier traditions of Sumer. In the next part, we examine another dimension of Sumerian cultural influence: the myths and stories that shaped how ancient Mesopotamians understood the origins of the world and the nature of human life, alongside their achievements in administration, mathematics, and urban organization. The Sumerians also developed one of the earliest recorded bodies of mythology and narrative storytelling in human history. These stories were preserved on clay tablets and copied by scribes for centuries. They reveal how the people of ancient Mesopotamia understood the origins of the world, the role of the gods, and the place of humanity within the larger order of the universe. In Sumerian belief, the world was governed by a complex pantheon of gods, each responsible for different aspects of nature and society. The sky god An, often considered the highest deity, represented the distant heavens. Below him was Enlil, the powerful god associated with wind, air, and authority, who played a central role in determining the fate of both gods and humans. Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water, was believed to possess deep knowledge of creation and the hidden forces of the world. These deities formed the upper ranks of the divine hierarchy and were often associated with major temples in Sumerian cities. Other gods represented natural forces that were closely connected to daily life. Utu, the sun god, was associated with justice and truth, as the sun's light was believed to reveal hidden wrongdoing. Nana, the moon god, governed the cycles of night and was particularly important to the city of Ur, where his temple stood at the center of religious life. The goddess Inanna, one of the most complex figures in Sumerian mythology, embodied both fertility and warfare. She was worshipped widely across Mesopotamia and later became known as Ishtar in Akkadian traditions. These gods were not distant or abstract beings. In Sumerian mythology, they were deeply involved in the events of the world. Myths describe them creating humanity, establishing cities, and intervening in the lives of kings and ordinary people. Temples served as the earthly homes of these gods, where priests conducted rituals and offered food, animals, and precious goods to maintain divine favor. One of the most important Sumerian myths is the story of the creation of humanity. In some versions of this narrative, the gods created humans to assist them by performing labor on the earth. According to the myth, the gods initially carried out the work of maintaining the world themselves, but eventually grew weary of these responsibilities. Humanity was then created to cultivate fields, build temples, and sustain the divine order through offerings and rituals. Another famous narrative from the Sumerian tradition is the story of the Great Flood, which appears in several Mesopotamian texts. In one early version, the gods decide to send a catastrophic flood to destroy humanity. But a wise figure of fun, named Ziusudra, in Sumerian traditions, warned by a god and instructed to build a large boat. After surviving the flood, he is granted a form of immortality. This story would later appear in modified forms in Akkadian literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, and has parallels with flood traditions found in other cultures. These myths were more than entertainment. They provided explanations for natural events, social order, and the responsibilities of rulers and communities. Kings often presented themselves as chosen by the gods to maintain justice and protect their cities. Religious festivals reenacted mythological events, reinforcing the connection between divine stories and everyday life. The preservation of these myths in written form allowed them to influence later civilizations long after the Sumerians themselves had lost political power. Babylonian and Assyrian scribes copied and adapted many of these narratives, ensuring that Sumerian mythology remained an essential part of Mesopotamian cultural tradition. In the next part, we move toward the final phase of our journey by examining how the long legacy of Sumer connects to the broader story of ancient civilizations and the continuing search for the origins of organized human society. When historians study the earliest chapters of organized human society, the civilization of Sumer stands as one of the most important starting points. The people who built the cities of southern Mesopotamia were not simply early farmers experimenting with irrigation along two rivers. Over centuries, they created systems of administration, writing, religion, and economic organization that allowed large urban societies to function. Many of the structures that later civilizations would depend on were first tested and refined in the cities of Sumer. One of the most transformative developments was the creation of recorded administration. Before the invention of writing, communities relied on memory and oral agreements to track goods, labor, and obligations. As settlements grew larger, these methods became unreliable. The introduction of cuneiform writing allowed administrators to record transactions on clay tablets, making it possible to manage resources across entire cities and regions. This ability to store information outside the human memory marked a fundamental shift in how societies could organize themselves. Urban government also developed in ways that would influence later civilizations. In Sumerian cities, rulers worked alongside temple institutions to coordinate labor, maintain irrigation systems, and oversee construction projects. This combination of religious authority and political leadership became a common feature of many early states. Later, civilizations across the Near East adopted similar models in which kings ruled with the support of powerful religious institutions and administrative officials. Another important aspect of Sumerian society was the organization of labor and agriculture. Large irrigation networks required constant maintenance, and coordinating these efforts demanded cooperation across entire communities. Farmers, canal workers, craftsmen, and administrators all contributed to the functioning of the urban economy. By organizing labor on a large scale, Sumerian cities were able to produce food surpluses that supported populations far larger than those of earlier villages. Trade networks also expanded significantly during the Sumerian period. Because southern Mesopotamia lacked many natural resources, merchants traveled long distances to obtain materials such as copper, timber, and stone. These exchanges connected Sumerian cities to distant regions, including Anatolia, the Iranian Plateau, and areas along the Persian Gulf. Through trade, ideas and technologies moved between societies, helping spread elements of Sumerian culture beyond the river plains where the civilization first developed. Equally important was the role of cultural storytelling and tradition. The myths, hymns, and epic narratives recorded by Sumerian scribes provided frameworks for understanding the world and the responsibilities of human communities. These stories shaped religious beliefs and social values for generations. Even after new empires rose in Mesopotamia, scribes continued copying these texts, ensuring that the intellectual traditions of Sumer remained part of the cultural heritage of the region. When modern archaeologists began uncovering Sumerian cities in the 19th and 20th centuries, they revealed a civilization that had been hidden for thousands of years beneath the plains of Mesopotamia. The thousands of clay tablets recovered from these sites allowed scholars to reconstruct economic systems, political events, and everyday life with remarkable detail. Through these discoveries, the earliest recorded civilization in human history re-entered the modern world's understanding of the past. The story of Sumer demonstrates that civilization did not emerge suddenly or in isolation. It developed gradually as communities experimented with agriculture, built cities, created systems of law, and recorded their knowledge. The achievements of the Sumerians formed a foundation that later civilizations would build upon for thousands of years. In the next act, we move toward the final stage of our journey, exploring how the rise of later Mesopotamian powers continued the story that had begun in the first cities of Sumer. After the fall of the Third Dynasty of around 2004 BC, Mesopotamia did not remain politically unified for long. The collapse of Sumer's last major centralized kingdom created a power vacuum across the river plains. Without a strong dynasty controlling the region, several new groups and city-states began competing for influence. Many of these emerging powers were led by Amorite rulers, a Semitic-speaking people who had gradually migrated into Mesopotamia from regions to the west. These Amorite leaders did not destroy the existing urban culture of the region. Instead, they entered cities that already possessed long-established institutions, temples, administrative systems, irrigation networks, and scribal schools. Rather than replacing these systems, the new rulers adopted them. Cuneiform writing continued to be used in administration. Sumerian religious traditions remained influential, and the basic structure of city governance survived. In this sense, the political change did not erase the legacy of Sumer. It simply transferred power into new hands. During this period, several cities rose to prominence across Mesopotamia. Isin, Larsa, and the Shnana became important regional centers competing for authority over surrounding territories. These cities controlled farmland, trade routes, and irrigation canals that were essential for economic survival. Rulers of these cities often presented themselves as heirs to the traditions of the earlier Sumerian kings. Inscriptions from this period frequently describe kings repairing ancient temples, restoring canals, and maintaining justice in ways that echoed the ideals of earlier Sumerian rulers. Among the cities rising during this time was one that would eventually become the most powerful of them all: Babylon. At the beginning of the second millennium BC, Babylon was still a relatively modest settlement compared to older cities such as Ur or Uruk. However, its location along the Euphrates River placed it at an important crossroads for trade and communication across Mesopotamia. Over time, this strategic position would help Babylon grow in influence. The early kings of Babylon were members of an Amorite dynasty that gradually expanded their authority over surrounding territories. Like other rulers of the period, they relied heavily on administrative systems inherited from earlier Mesopotamian traditions. Scribes recorded economic transactions on clay tablets. Temples remained central to religious life, and irrigation networks continued supporting agricultural production. Although political leadership had changed, the basic structure of society remained rooted in systems that had developed during the Sumerian era. Competition between cities remained a defining feature of the political landscape. Alliances formed and dissolved as rulers attempted to strengthen their influence. Military campaigns were launched to capture strategic locations or secure access to resources. At the same time, Trade and cultural exchange continued connecting these cities across the region. Merchants carried goods between urban centers, while scribes copied texts that preserved centuries of Mesopotamian knowledge. This environment of rivalry and opportunity created conditions in which a particularly capable ruler could expand his authority across much of Mesopotamia. Such a leader would soon emerge in Babylon during the 18th century BCE. His name would become one of the most recognizable in ancient history. Hammurabi. In the next part of this act, we examine how Hammurabi transformed Babylon from a regional city-state into one of the most powerful kingdoms in Mesopotamia. By the early 18th century BCE, the political map of Mesopotamia was still divided among several competing kingdoms. Cities such as Larsa, Ishnuna, Mari, and Babylon each controlled territories along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and their rulers constantly negotiated alliances or fought conflicts in attempts to expand their influence. Among these rulers was a young king who would eventually reshape the balance of power across the entire region. Hammurabi of Babylon, who came to the throne around 1792 BC. When Hammurabi first became king, Babylon was not yet the dominant power of Mesopotamia. Larger and older cities still held significant influence, and Babylon's territory was relatively modest compared to some of its rivals. However, Hammurabi proved to be a patient and strategic leader. During the early years of his reign, he focused on strengthening his kingdom internally rather than launching immediate conquests. He invested in infrastructure projects, including the maintenance of irrigation canals that supported agriculture in the surrounding countryside. These projects helped stabilize food production and ensured that the city could support a growing population. Hammurabi also worked to reinforce the religious and administrative institutions that were central to Mesopotamian society. Temples dedicated to major deities were repaired or expanded, and scribes continued producing detailed records of economic activity. By maintaining strong administrative structures inherited from earlier Sumerian traditions, Hammurabi ensured that his kingdom operated efficiently and could mobilize resources when needed. Diplomacy played a crucial role in Hammurabi's strategy. Rather than immediately confronting stronger rivals, he formed alliances with neighboring kingdoms. These agreements allowed Babylon to remain secure while other powers competed with one another. For several years, Hammurabi maintained a relatively balanced political position, observing the shifting relationships between surrounding states. Eventually, however, the balance of power began to change. Conflicts among other Mesopotamian rulers weakened several kingdoms that had once dominated the region. Hammurabi recognized the opportunity and began expanding Babylon's influence through a series of military campaigns. One by one, rival cities were defeated or brought under Babylonian control. A major turning point came when Hammurabi confronted the powerful kingdom of Larsa, which had long been one of the strongest states in southern Mesopotamia. After a successful campaign, Babylon gained control over Larsa, its territories significantly expanding its access to fertile farmland and trade routes. With this victory, Hammurabi established Babylon as one of the most powerful states in the region. Hammurabi continued his expansion by defeating other rival kingdoms, including Ishnuna and Mari. By the later years of his reign, he had brought much of Mesopotamia under Babylonian authority. The kingdom now stretched across large sections of the Tigris-Euphrates river system, incorporating cities that had once been independent powers. Despite these military achievements, Hammurabi did not attempt to erase the traditions of the cities he conquered. Instead, he maintained many existing institutions while placing them under Babylonian administration. Local temples continued functioning, scribes preserved the cuneiform writing system, and economic activities remained organized through administrative practices that had been developed centuries earlier in the cities of Sumer. Through this approach, Hammurabi transformed Babylon into the center of a powerful kingdom, while preserving the cultural foundations inherited from earlier Mesopotamian civilizations. His reign represents one of the clearest examples of how the legacy of Sumer continued influencing political and legal institutions long after the Sumerian city-states themselves had lost power. In the next part, we examine one of the most famous achievements associated with Hammurabi, the creation of a written legal code that became one of the best-known documents from the ancient world. One of the most famous achievements of Hammurabi's reign was the creation of a written legal code that would become one of the most well-known documents from the ancient world. Although earlier rulers in Mesopotamia had already produced legal texts such as the Law Code of Uruk, centuries earlier Hammurabi's code stands out because of its scale, detail, and the way it was publicly displayed. The laws were carved into a large basalt stele, a tall stone monument placed in a public location where people could see it. At the top of the stele, a carved image shows Hammurabi standing before the sun, god Shema, who is associated with justice and truth. In the image, the god appears to be presenting the king with the authority to establish laws. This scene symbolized the idea that the legal system of Babylon was not only a human creation, but also supported by divine approval. Below the image, the surface of the stele contains hundreds of written laws, recorded in cuneiform script. These laws addressed a wide range of situations in daily life, including property disputes, contracts, family relationships, wages, trade, and criminal offenses. Many of the laws follow a structured format that describes a situation and then states the appropriate consequence. For example, if someone caused damage to another person's property, the law specified the type of compensation that must be paid. The Code of Hammurabi reflects the complex society that had developed in Mesopotamia by this time. Babylonian cities included merchants, farmers, craftsmen, priests, officials, and laborers, all interacting within a busy urban economy. Legal rules helped regulate these relationships and provided guidelines for resolving conflicts. Courts could refer to these laws when judging disputes between individuals or groups. However, the code also shows that Babylonian society recognized different social classes, and the penalties for certain actions varied depending on the status of the people involved. Some laws distinguished between nobles, common citizens, and enslaved individuals. The consequences for similar offenses could differ depending on the social position of the victim and the accused. One of the most widely remembered principles associated with the code is the concept often summarized as an eye for an eye. This idea reflected the principle that punishment should correspond directly to the harm caused. While this phrase is frequently quoted today, the actual laws included many different forms of penalties, including fines, compensation payments, and in some cases physical punishment. The importance of the Code of Hammurabi lies not only in the specific laws it contained, but also in the idea that legal rules could be written, organized, and publicly known. By recording laws in a permanent form, the Babylonian government created a reference point for judges, officials, and citizens. This approach helped establish a sense of order within a large and diverse kingdom. The code also demonstrates how later Mesopotamian rulers continued building upon earlier traditions that had originated in Sumerian cities. The use of cuneiform writing, the involvement of divine authority in legitimizing laws, and the effort to regulate economic and social life all reflected ideas that had developed over many centuries in the region. Hammurabi's legal code became one of the best-preserved examples of ancient law and remains an important historical document for understanding early systems of governance. Even though Babylonian society would eventually change and new empires would rise, the code stands as a powerful symbol of how ancient civilizations attempted to create structured systems of justice. In the next part of this act, we conclude the journey from Sumer to Babylon by examining how the achievements of both civilizations shaped the broader history of the ancient world. By the later years of Hammurabi's reign, the political map of Mesopotamia had changed dramatically. The network of independent city-states that had once defined the Sumerian world cities, such as Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, and Eriduos, now largely unified under the authority of Babylon. What had previously been a landscape of competing urban centers had become a broader territorial kingdom governed from a single capital. Yet despite this political transformation, the deeper structures of Mesopotamian civilization remained firmly rooted in traditions that had begun thousands of years earlier in Sumer. Babylon did not create a completely new civilization. Instead, it inherited an already complex system that had developed over many centuries. The administrative framework that allowed Babylon to govern large territories was built upon practices first established in the Sumerian cities. Scribes continued recording economic activity on clay tablets, using cuneiform writing, the same script invented in Uruk during the 4th millennium BCE. These records documented grain storage, trade transactions, tax obligations, and labor assignments across the kingdom. Without this system of written administration, managing a large territory would have been extremely difficult. Agriculture remained the foundation of the economy, just as it had during the earliest Sumerian periods. The fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia depended on carefully maintained irrigation canals that directed river water to fields of barley, wheat, and date palms. Babylonian rulers continued the long tradition of investing in canal construction and maintenance. Understanding that agricultural productivity was essential for supporting both urban populations and state institutions, workers organized through administrative systems carried out these large projects, ensuring that water continued flowing through the networks that sustained the land. Religion also reflected a strong continuity with the earlier Sumerian world. Many of the gods originally worshipped in Sumerian temples continued to hold central positions in Babylonian belief. Enlil, associated with authority and wind, remained an important deity. Shamash, the sun god linked to justice, was widely honored in legal and religious contexts. Ishtar, the Akkadian form of the Sumerian goddess Inanna, continued to represent fertility, love, and warfare. At the same time, Babylon elevated its own patron god, Marduk, whose status gradually rose within the Mesopotamian pantheon as the political power of Babylon increased. Cultural traditions preserved by scribes also maintained the connection to Sumerian heritage. Clay tablets copied in Babylonian schools included ancient Sumerian hymns, myths, and royal inscriptions. Students learning to write cuneiform often practiced by copying texts that were already hundreds or even thousands of years old. Through this educational system, the intellectual traditions of Sumer were preserved long after the original cities had lost political independence. Trade networks that had developed during the Sumerian and Akkadian periods also continued operating under Babylonian rule. Merchants transported goods along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, and across overland routes connecting Mesopotamia with neighboring regions such as Anatolia, the Levant, and the Iranian plateau. Copper, timber, precious stones, and other valuable materials moved along these routes, supporting craft production and urban economies across the region. The rise of Babylon, therefore, represents not a sudden break from the past, but rather the continuation of a long historical process that began with the earliest cities of Sumer. The administrative tools, religious traditions, and economic systems that allowed Babylon to flourish were the result of centuries of earlier experimentation and development. In the next act, we move toward the final phase of the story by examining how the legacy of Sumer and Babylon shaped the broader history of ancient civilizations and influenced societies far beyond Mesopotamia. When historians look back at the origins of organized civilization, the story often begins in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, thousands of years before the rise of Greece, Rome, or even ancient Egypt's most famous dynasties. Communities in southern Mesopotamia began building cities that would change the course of human history. These were the cities of Sumer, and within them appeared many of the institutions that later civilizations would rely upon. The transformation began gradually. Early farming communities settled along the rivers, learning how to control seasonal flooding through irrigation canals. Managing these systems required cooperation across entire communities, since canals often stretched across wide areas of farmland. Over time, villages expanded into towns, and towns eventually became the first true cities. In places such as Uruk, Yor, and Lagash, thousands of people lived within organized urban spaces supported by agriculture, trade, and administrative coordination. These early cities created new challenges that required new solutions. As populations grew larger, keeping track of resources became more difficult. Farmers delivered grain to storage facilities. Craftsmen produced goods for trade, and laborers worked on construction projects and canal maintenance. Managing these activities required reliable record keeping. From this need emerged one of the most important innovations in human history: writing. The cuneiform script, first developed in Uruk around the late 4th millennium BCE, allowed administrators to record information on clay tablets. At first, these records tracked economic transactions, shipments of grain, labor assignments, and storage inventories. Over time, writing expanded beyond administration into literature, religion, and historical documentation. For the first time, societies could preserve knowledge across generations in a permanent form. Urban organization also introduced new forms of leadership. In Sumerian cities, rulers coordinated irrigation projects, organized labor forces, and oversaw the construction of temples dedicated to the gods. Religious institutions played a central role in urban life, since temples served not only as places of worship but also as economic centers where food and resources were redistributed. Monumental structures such as ziggurats rose above the cities, symbolizing the connection between human communities and the divine order they believed governed the world. Trade networks expanded as cities grew. Southern Mesopotamia lacked natural resources such as timber, stone, and metal, so merchants traveled long distances to obtain these materials. River routes and overland paths connected Sumerian cities to regions as far as Anatolia, the Persian Gulf, and the Iranian Plateau. Through these networks, goods moved across the ancient Near East, and with them traveled ideas, technologies, and cultural traditions. The achievements of the Sumerians created the foundation upon which later civilizations would build. Systems of law, written administration, urban planning, organized religion, and long-distance trade all developed within these early cities. Even after political power shifted to new kingdoms such as Babylon, the cultural and intellectual framework established by the Sumerians remained deeply embedded in Mesopotamian society. Understanding this long development helps explain why historians often describe Sumer as the first civilization. The cities of southern Mesopotamia were not simply large settlements. They were complex societies capable of organizing labor, recording knowledge, and maintaining cultural traditions across generations. In the final part of this journey, we step back and consider how the legacy of Sumer continues to shape our understanding of human civilization, and the long path that led from the first cities to the modern world. When the last Sumerian dynasties disappeared and new kingdoms rose across Mesopotamia, the world did not reset or begin again from nothing. Instead, the institutions that had first taken shape in the earliest cities continued to influence societies for centuries. The rise of Babylon, and later the empires of Assyria and Persia, all occurred within a cultural environment that had already been shaped by the experiments of the Sumerians. In this sense, the civilization that began along the river plains never truly ended. It simply evolved through new political forms. One of the clearest examples of this continuity was the survival of cuneiform writing. For nearly 3,000 years after its invention in Uruk, the wedge-shaped script remained the primary system for recording information across Mesopotamia. Kings issued decrees using it. Merchants documented trade agreements with it, and scribes copied literature and religious texts, using the same clay tablet methods that had begun in the earliest Sumerian cities. Even when languages changed, the writing system endured, preserving the intellectual heritage of the region. The urban model created in Sumer also became a lasting blueprint for later civilizations. Cities continued to function as centers of administration, religion, and economic production. Temples remained important institutions, while rulers relied on organized bureaucracies to manage taxation, labor, and agriculture. The idea that a city could serve as the center of political authority, supported by written administration and coordinated infrastructure, would spread far beyond Mesopotamia. Legal traditions followed a similar path. Early law codes developed in Sumer influenced later Mesopotamian rulers who recorded their own legal systems. These laws attempted to regulate economic transactions, define property rights, and maintain social order within expanding populations, while each kingdom introduced its own legal reforms. The concept that justice should be recorded and publicly known remained deeply rooted in the traditions of the earliest cities. The intellectual legacy of Sumer also extended into fields such as mathematics, astronomy, and timekeeping. Systems based on the number 60 continued shaping how later societies measured time and geometry. The division of hours into 60 minutes and the circle into 360 degrees are distant echoes of calculations developed in ancient Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. These conventions eventually spread through later civilizations and remain part of the modern world today. Equally important was the preservation of Sumerian myths and literature. Stories written on clay tablets continued circulating among scribes for centuries. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, carried themes about mortality, friendship, and the search for meaning that still resonate with readers today. Through these texts, the voices of the earliest urban societies continue speaking across thousands of years. Modern archaeology has helped recover this long history. Excavations across Iraq and neighboring regions have revealed cities buried beneath layers of earth and time. Clay tablets, temple foundations, tools, and everyday objects have allowed historians to reconstruct the lives of the people who built the first cities. Each discovery adds another detail to the story of how human societies moved from scattered villages toward organized civilizations. The world we live in today, filled with cities, governments, written laws, and recorded knowledge, did not emerge suddenly. It developed through countless generations of experimentation, cooperation, and adaptation. Among the earliest chapters of that story are the cities of Sumer, where communities first learned how to organize large societies and record their experiences for the future. When we look back across the long arc of history, the plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers appear as one of the places where the human journey toward civilization truly began. The stones of temples may have weathered, and the languages of those early cities may have changed, but the systems they created continue to echo through the structures of the modern world.